Welcome to the Zombie Story Zone, your ultimate destination for spine-chilling zombie tales, where the undead come to life. If you're a fan of thrilling, edge-of-your-seat zombie stories that keep you up at night, you're in the right place. Get ready to dive into terrifying worlds where survival is the only option and the dead aren't the only thing to fear. Before we begin today's story, don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready for some undead action. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, we love hearing your theories and favorite moments. And make sure to share this with your fellow horror fans, because the more, the scarier. Now, grab a seat and brace yourself for a journey into the world of the undead. Let's get into it. The night was unnaturally quiet. The wind, usually a howling companion in the desolate landscape of Gorseth Hollow, lay still as if silenced by the weight of impending doom. The moon, swollen and blood-red, loomed low in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the forgotten cemetery where time had ceased to matter. It was a night when things long dead stirred beneath the soil. At the edge of the cemetery, two teenagers, Maya and Ethan, stood by the rusted gates, staring into the darkness. They'd heard the stories, passed down in hushed whispers, the legend of the vengeful spirit, said to rise from the dead every 50 years, seeking revenge for wrongs forgotten by time but not by the soul who suffered them. "You really believe this stuff?" Maya asked, her breath visible in the chilly night air. Ethan chuckled, his confidence masking a hint of nervousness. "It's just a story, Maya. Come on, we'll be fine. We're only here for a couple of minutes. We take a picture, prove to everyone we're not scared, and then we're out." Maya glanced back at the town, a small dot of light far in the distance. Part of her wanted to leave, but she wasn't going to be the one to back out. Not after Ethan dared her. She tightened her grip on the flashlight and nodded. The gate groaned as they pushed it open, stepping onto the overgrown path that led deeper into the cemetery. Rows of cracked tombstones lined the way, their inscriptions worn and unreadable. The air grew colder as they ventured further in, the silence around them pressing in like a physical force. "We'll go to the old mausoleum," Ethan suggested. "That's where they say the spirit is trapped." Maya shot him a skeptical look. "And we're going there because..." "Because," Ethan replied, flashing her a grin, "we need the best spot for the photo, right?" They trudged onward, the mausoleum looming ahead like a monument to death itself. The structure was ancient, its stone walls dark with age, and the door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting them in. Ethan stepped forward, pushing the door wider. A rush of cold air greeted them, carrying with it the faint smell of decay. Maya hesitated but followed him inside. The mausoleum was small, with stone slabs lining the walls where coffins once rested. At the center of the room stood a single sarcophagus, its lid slightly askew. "This is where they buried him," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The spirit." Maya frowned. "Who?" "They called him Lazarus," Ethan explained, pulling out his phone to take pictures. "A guy from the 1800s who was wrongly accused of murder. The townspeople hung him, but before he died, he swore he'd come back for revenge. 50 years later, people started vanishing. Every 50 years, it happens again." Maya's skin prickled as the story settled into the back of her mind, blending with the cold dread that had been growing inside her since they stepped into the cemetery. "So, we're messing with the spirit of a murderer?" Ethan shrugged. He wasn't a murderer. He was innocent, remember? Besides, it's just a myth. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered. Maya tapped it, but the beam sputtered and died, leaving them in near darkness. Ethan's phone flashlight was their only source of light now, casting eerie shadows on the ancient stone walls. A soft scraping sound filled the mausoleum. Maya froze, her heart racing. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Ethan laughed nervously. "It's probably just an animal." But the sound grew louder, a rhythmic thud like something heavy shifting inside the stone sarcophagus. "Ethan, we need to go. Now." Before Ethan could reply, the sarcophagus lid slid open with a deafening scrape, revealing the decayed form of a man, Lazarus. His eyes, sunken and hollow, glowed with an unnatural fire. His body, though rotted and broken, moved with a terrifying purpose. He rose from the tomb, his skeletal fingers curling into fists, eyes locking onto Maya and Ethan. Maya screamed, grabbing Ethan's arm and pulling him toward the door. They bolted out of the mausoleum, but the air was thick with the stench of death and the sound of more scraping, more graves being disturbed. The ground trembled beneath their feet as other corpses began to rise, their ancient bodies animated by the same vengeful spirit that had brought Lazarus back. "They're all coming," Ethan shouted, panic overtaking him as they ran through the cemetery. Maya glanced back to see dozens of figures emerging from the ground, their eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. The dead had risen, and they were fast. Far faster than they had any right to be. "We need to get to the car," Maya gasped, her breath ragged as she sprinted through the rows of tombstones. The rusted gate loomed ahead, but the dead were gaining on them, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Ethan stumbled over a root, crashing to the ground. Maya skidded to a stop, turning back to help him up, but it was too late. The dead swarmed him, their rotted hands pulling him down into the dirt. "Run, Maya!" Ethan screamed, his voice barely audible over the groans of the dead. Tears blurred her vision as she turned and fled, her heart shattering at the sound of Ethan's final scream. She didn't stop until she reached the gate, slamming it shut behind her. The dead, for some reason, didn't follow her beyond the cemetery's boundary. They stood at the gate, their glowing eyes fixed on her, their mouths twisting into grotesque smiles. Maya backed away, her legs shaking, but she wasn't safe yet. The spirit, Lazarus, had found a way to return, and he wouldn't stop until he had his revenge on the town that had wronged him. Over the next few days, the town of Gorseth Hollow descended into chaos. People began disappearing, first one by one, then entire families. The police were helpless, their investigations leading only to dead ends. The few bodies that were found showed signs of savage attacks, as if they had been mauled by animals, but the truth was far worse. Maya stayed in her house, barricading the doors and windows, praying that the spirit would leave her alone. But deep down, she knew it was only a matter of time. The dead were relentless, driven by the vengeful spirit that had brought them back. They wanted more than just random victims. They wanted justice. They wanted blood. One night, the silence outside her house was shattered by a deafening crash. Maya jolted awake, her heart pounding as she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching her front door. She grabbed the nearest weapon, a baseball bat, and crept toward the sound. The door burst open, and Lazarus stood there, his decayed face twisted into a mask of rage. Behind him, the dead crowded her porch, their eyes glowing in the darkness. Maya swung the bat, but Lazarus caught it effortlessly, his strength far beyond anything she could fight. He stared into her eyes, and for a moment, she saw something human in his gaze, something that spoke of betrayal and endless suffering. "This town will burn," Lazarus rasped, his voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "They will all pay for what they did to me." Maya's heart raced as she realized there was no escaping this. The spirit's thirst for revenge was insatiable, and it would consume everything in its path. The dead surged forward, and Maya screamed as the darkness closed in around her. Outside, the town was silent. The dead had risen, and their vengeance would be swift.